Street smart millionaire. Have you ever wondered, how does somebody start off ground zero in life and completely turn things around and become a multimillionaire, not only in their finances, but in their relationship with their spouse, in the relationship with their children, in the community that they're in? Today, I'm excited to introduce you to my friend Dan Grieb as he unpacks some of the decisions that he's made throughout his journey of life that's caused him to be the man who he is today. Dan, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you very much. First thing here is the reason why I even came up with the idea of a street smart millionaire is because when people think of a millionaire, they're thinking of this person that lives behind like the big gates, drives the expensive car, is an attorney, doctor, that thing that's not attainable to the rest of us. And a street smart millionaire to me is somebody who kind of bootstraps their way up and makes it happen. They use their street smarts to live a really epic life.
Man, that's solid. So obviously you're a street smart millionaire. Looking back, that I think about my upbringing and growing up. So when I hear street smarts, what's the backstory to that street smart for you personally, Dan?
Yeah, thank you very much again. Just like you, I grew up with a troubled life. I don't have the DNA for the life I have today. It was all the result of choices compounded over time that allowed me to get to where I am today. So when I think about a street smart billionaire, that's somebody that kind of grew up through it, that went through it. Now, here's the deal. A lot of people in your audience, they're either have gone through it, are going through it, or will go through it. And what I'm hoping that my podcast can do for them is inspire them to see a broken vessel like me was able to make it to the other side, and they can too. I started out, product of a single mom, abused and kidnapped by my biological dad, many issues that went through my life. And it was my response to those that have led me to the place I am today. And I think we'll circle back to this, but here's the crazy thing. I'm the victim of domestic violence, abused by my dad, literally broken bones in the face, teeth. My mother suffered the same consequences, felt ostracized as a young man. I was sexually assaulted by someone when I was, in my early teens. I've gone through it all. I got hit in the head with a bottle when I was 19 years old and almost died. I've literally been through so much. And at 50 years old today, not only do I look back on those valley seasons of my life and would I not change them? But today I'm actually grateful for them. Now that's a lot to ask for somebody who's like going through some pretty heavy stuff right now. Like, I'm not asking our audience to go and say, hey, I'm grateful for my life scenarios that are happening right now. What I want to point them to is the opportunity to see those valleys as the setup or the mountaintops ahead. And when you're in those valleys, Chris, there's really two questions you ask yourself. If you're religious, you ask these questions. God, what are you preparing me for? Or God, what are you attempting to teach me? Now I can look back over my shoulder and I can see the valleys of my childhood, that 10, 11 years old, being abused by my dad. And I can see what God was doing in that season of my life. I can see when I was a teenager, when I was ostracized and felt very alone and had my daddy issues. I can see God's lessons in that. I can see his hand at work. When I got hit in the head with a bottle, that was the greatest thing that ever happened to me because it led me to my life in Florida from where I grew up in New York. So I can see a very clear line between where I am and where I came from. And I'm actually grateful for it.
You use the word opportunity.
Yeah.
So when I hear the word opportunity, I think about like there's a choice involved there.
Yeah.
That I can make a choice. I can make a decision.
Yeah.
So,
well, go ahead. I was just telling a friend of mine earlier that I have many Danisms, and one of them that I believe is a Dan Grieb original. If any of your audience hears this and they're like, no, I've heard it somewhere else, please tell me, and I'll stop calling it Danism. But I believe I came up with this one. It's very simple. It says this: people always do what they want to do. And you could say you want to do something, but like, how bad do you want to do it? That'll indicate whether you did it or you didn't do it. Now, for me, I look back at my childhood. I look at where I grew up. I look at all the people that have invested in me over my lifetime, and I feel this sense of responsibility to make better choices compounded over time. And it's simple, right? So my children did not have a great dad. My dad was terrible. He was an evil man. So then I made a commitment that I would be the world's greatest dad so that my children wouldn't feel what I felt. And my mother had the world's worst husband. So I made a commitment that my wife would never feel the way that my mom felt. So I'd be everything to my wife that my father wasn't to my mom, and I'd be everything to my children that my dad wasn't to me.
Wow.
And those were just choices. And
Mm.
the pain of being my dad was so much more difficult than the pain of changing into the person that I wanted to be. Either one requires work. Either one requires pain.
Right.
But the pain of who I wanted to be was a lot easier.
So if somebody's listening and they find themselves in a spot they're not proud of, they're in one of the valley seasons of life, what are some practical steps looking back you could see clearly now that have helped you continue to move forward in your journey in life?
Yeah.
Because I think
Well,
there's a temptation to get stuck and discouraged and depressed and defeated and ultimately give up, man.
absolutely. Well, I live by three key principles that I literally live by, and they're the filters of which I see life. And number one is life is 10% about what happens and 90% how you respond. Like that's an easy one. Anyone can get that, right?
Hmm.
Second one says this a little bit longer, and I'll write these down for you so you can put them in your show notes later. Okay. It says
Yep.
this. You are at the place, at the time, experiencing what you're supposed to be experiencing, going through what you're supposed to be going through at the exact time in your life you're supposed to be going through it with whom you're supposed to be going through it with. That's preordained by the God of the universe. You're not here by accident. You're here because God is going to teach you something or God is preparing you for something. And the third one is today's the first day of the rest of your life.
Hmm.
Like today's where it all begins. So you ask the question, well, what if somebody's ashamed of where they are? Well, if you're ashamed of where you are, I want you to remember today's the first day of the rest of your life. Like you don't have to be ashamed of who you were yesterday. You can only be ashamed of who you are right now. Well, like you got a fresh chance to make a new decision today. Today's the first day of doing that. Today's the day that you can make the decision to lose the weight and start becoming that healthier person. Today's the day you start making that relationship come back together. Today's the day you start being a good dad, being a good mom. Today's the day you start getting out of debt. Today's the day. It's the first day of the rest of your life where you're going to go become that person. And the next thought I've got for you on that is simply this. Like you asked the question, so what's a practical step, right? Simple.
Hmm.
Do the next right thing. Then what? The next right thing. Then what? The next right thing. Then what? The next right thing. Then what do you do? The next right thing. Then what do you do? The next right thing. And look, after you've done the next right thing a certain amount of times, you're going to look over your shoulder and you're not going to see this like this place of despair behind you. You're going to see a win behind you and a win behind that and a win behind that. Yeah, but Dan, what happens if I fall off the wagon and I blow it again? Well, then do the next right thing. And then start compounding the next right thing. You know, my brothers, my older brother and I do not have the same life. We do not at all. He grew up to be just like my dad.
Mm.
And you ask me, what's the difference between you and your brother? Well, I'll tell you. The decisions compounded over time.
Wow.
That's it. My decision was to do the next right thing. His decision was to do maybe the easy thing or whatever. And then you look at that like, you know, today, no difference, right?
Hmm.
Tomorrow, no difference. Next day, no difference. You look at that over the course of 5 years.
Yeah.
You look at that over the course of 20 years, astronomical,
Mhm.
astronomical.
Yeah. Man, that's solid. And even, I've experienced, a few different ways professionally and then personally. Our paths crossed. I think it was Boston. And I'm like, who is this dude? We ended up sharing a room together. You remember that, Dan? You
I
come
do.
in at like 2 or 3 in the morning. You just got off a flight. You woke up after a few hours of sleep to run like 10 or 20 miles. It was something crazy. And so ever since I met you, I've just been intrigued by you because I would say your level of intentionality and your confidence is just, I found myself just being curious about who is Dan Grieb. And I had the privilege and opportunity a few years ago when I called you and said, hey, Dan, I want to train for a triathlon. And yet you asked me if I know how to swim, bike, and run. I said, I've never done any of those things. And you were generous and offered me to come teach me those things and stay in your personal home in Orlando. And thank you for doing that, Dan. Game changer in my life. One of the things that stood out wasn't even the training that we did, Dan. I don't even know if I've ever shared this with you. So I'll share it with you now. One of the most powerful moments was us riding around in your car, and we were pulling into your subdivision, and there was a young man who you knew, and you saw him. So you went like out of your way, you circled back around to pull up next to him, hop out of your car, go over and greet him, and just hug him and ask him how he's doing and say hello to him. And so that was one of the most powerful moments where I look at you and how you live your life. And you have such an outward focus on number one, your family, your community, and the people. Like you care so much about people. It inspires me and challenges me, Dan. So I want to say thank you for that.
Oh, I'm honored to be that person. Thank you.
How does somebody go from essentially streets to a millionaire? How does that happen, man? That's wild.
Well, I think that it's going to be a series of things, right? So number one, it's doing the right things. And you know, in sales, it's the right things. It's a husband, the right things. It's father, the right things. It's do the right things. But also it's a belief, right? It's surrounding yourself by people that you believe you can be like. Now, for me, I would like to say I'm not that smart. I look at things very simply, and I would say, well, go find a model. So if Chris Ward's your model, there you go. Wait a second, Dan. Like I thought a model was this idea of a process and a system of doing things. No, a model can be a person. Like when I stand next to someone else and I go like, that guy did a triathlon. Why can't I do a triathlon?
Mm-hmm.
Look, in triathlons, we probably will talk about that a little bit. We both have that in common. Like when you think about doing an Ironman triathlon, that's 140.6 miles of activity. It takes the average person, 15 hours to do that. That's 15 hours of exercising. That's a long time of exercising. And the buildup to it is pretty significant.
Right.
When your audience hears that you did that, Chris, they're thinking that's crazy. Like there was a time in your life where you probably thought that's crazy. Swim 2.4 miles, then bike 100 miles, and then run a marathon at the end. What are you, crazy? That's crazy.
Yeah.
But here's the interesting thing, Chris. When you stand on the shore of that lake or that ocean that you're about to jump in, the morning of that race, and there's 2,000 to 5,000 people about to jump in that water with you, you know what being an Ironman is that day? Normal. Everybody standing on that beach is normal. They're all Ironmen. They're all going to do 140.6 miles. Like it's normal. Now, here's the thing. If you surround yourself with people who are not doing much, then you're probably not going to do much. I mean, we teach our children this stuff and we think as adults that it no longer applies, right? If you wake up with dogs, you wake up, if you sleep with dogs, you wake up with fleas. Like your parents tell you that, right?
Yeah.
And what that means is who you surround yourself by is what you become. Well, for me, I wanted to be something different. So I started surrounding myself by other people. I started looking for models. When I say a model, I meant people that had come from where I came from or were like me. And I said, well, if that guy can do it, I might have a chance to do it too. And then I just kept doing that. One more thing I have to share with you that I'd like to share that I think is germane to this topic is there should always be 3 people in your life. One person up ahead that you're like, I want to be where that person is. Now think about it about like climbing up a mountain, right? So there's someone up ahead and you're looking at them and they're screaming back at you, hey, Chris, come on. I know it's hard right there, but like work your way over that and it gets a little bit easier. You can do it. I promise. And you're like, okay. I trust that person that's up ahead. I'm going to keep going. That's your first person. The second person you want to have in your life is that person that's climbing the mountain with you. Hey, I'm going to keep going. You're going to keep going. Yeah, I'm not going to quit. You're going to quit. No. Well, if you're not going to quit, then I'm not going to quit. So let's keep going together. Right. Ironman triathlon training. That's so necessary, especially on those long, lonely days, right?
Right.
And then there should be the third person is the person that's further down the mountain from you that's counting on you to keep climbing. Hey, we see that person up ahead of us. We're doing good. It's hard where you are, but it's going to get easier when you get up here. So just get to here. And those 3 people in your life, they change your life. Here's the problem. We don't change our friend group. We stay with the same people our whole life, and then we expect our lives to change, and they don't.
Right. So find your who. Find somebody that's walking it out, a model. I love that you mentioned that because both of you and I are in real estate. So when I think of model, I think of Millionaire real estate agent. It's on my bookshelf right here. And yet you go to find a who.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, listen, when I mentor people like you know, you've had an opportunity to come stay with me, and I've had a lot of people come stay with me. I'm honored when people do. Um, People are like, "Hey, Dan, I want to learn about blank." And I'm like, "Great, come stay at my house with me." Like, what? Why would, what? Well, I was that guy. I get so many funny stories to tell you. I'll tell you one real quick here is I had a real estate mentor by the name of Rick Brinkus. Very successful, great guy, great family out of Las Vegas, super rich, killing it in real estate. I wanted to be like him. Well, we were friendly, and I was learning from him from afar. He lived in Vegas. I lived here in Orlando. And one day he said, "You know, Dan, I'm going on a Disney cruise." And I'm like, "Really, going on a Disney cruise?" He's like, "Yeah, I'm leaving out of Cape Canaveral, which is right here in Orlando." And I said, "Oh, that's interesting." And he goes, "Why?" I said, "I'm going on that cruise too." I hijacked the cruise, brought my whole family just so I can hang out with Rick Brinkus.
Wow.
And you know what I did the whole time? I went to his room. And when I visit Rick, I stayed at his house. Because here's the thing. We have a story in our head.
Hmm.
Oh yeah, he's succeeding at that level, but he's not a great dad.
Hmm.
So therefore, nope, I'm not interested. Oh, he's succeeding in that level, but he's out of shape. He's going to die young. So I'm not interested. Oh, he's succeeding at that level that I'm not, but he must not be a great husband, or he might not be a great mom, might not be a great wife, or whatever. We tell a story, but when you live in someone's home and you realize like that person's wife's yelling at them for leaving their underwear on the floor, like my wife's leaving, yelling at me for leaving my underwear on the floor. That person's lazy too. That person's got all the same flaws I do, and they're still succeeding. Then all of a sudden that becomes real for you too. And that's, for me, that's super important when you think about a model, is that you know that they're real.
Man, that's solid. I love that you broke it down to the three who's that we need. What if there was a second step or a second area of focus looking back over the years? What would that second area?
Well, for me, I think that who you surround yourself with matters, and then the things you tell yourself matter too.
Ooh.
Now, remember how the brain works, right? So your brain is 70,000 thoughts per day go through your brain. About 40,000 of them, 50,000 of them are the same thoughts you had yesterday. They're routine thoughts. And they're largely not they're not thoughts you can control. They're kind of just spontaneous, right? But the
Hmm.
thoughts you can control is what you got to like change over, because that voice in your head is usually the voice of, like in my case, it was my dad. The voice of you're a loser, you're never going to grow up to be anything, those people. I had to change that voice. Not only did I have to change that voice in my head, but I had to change what that voice in my head was telling me.
Hmm.
So what I did is I started memorizing speeches and poems and Bible verses, so that I created a new filter in my brain that when my thoughts would go through my brain, they would have to penetrate through these filters. Now, in the Bible, there's a verse, I'm sure you're aware of it. It says, take every thought captive and use it and view it in the light of the word, the Bible,
Hmm.
and use it for God's good. So if you're taking every thought captive, you're like, well, wait a second. Why is that coming through here right now? Is that serving me or not serving me? Is that thing I'm telling myself, is that going to help me be a better dad, husband, mom, wife? Is that going to help me be, accomplish my goals and become who I want to become? And then the last thing in regard to this vein of thinking that I have is simply this. Who do you want to be? You
Mm.
have to ask your question. Ask that question to yourself, like, who do I have to be? Who do I have to be so that I can be married for 25 years, that I can have children that are in love with me and I'm in love with them, that I can have a great business, a great life? Who do I have to be? And how do I change that? And when I'm responsible for that, then the world corresponds. When I'm a victim to the world, then the world just goes in all kinds of crazy directions and it's not paying attention to me. But when I'm responsible for my life, then the world, it orchestrates itself to the chorus of my song,
Mm.
and it allows me to live it out. So those are kind of the three things I would do. Number one, change who you're around. Like make sure
Mhm.
you're around the people. Find the models, right? Make
Mhm.
sure that you're got those three people in your life and that you're changing the way you think.
Man,
And you
that's so
do that
good.
intentionally.
Mhm. 100%. When it comes to somebody that is a solopreneur, so they're at the season, Dan, where they've launched their business, they're having success in that business, and yet they're not in business with others, meaning everything still rises and falls on them showing up and lead generating and going on the appointments and all of the things. How do you go from being a business owner of one to having a team. Like I wasn't communicating with you about recording today. I was communicating with your executive assistant.
Yeah. Well, I think that first off, as if you're a solopreneur, you're in the driver's seat of life. Don't
Mm.
think that that's a bad thing. You know, again, another like Danism thought is don't compete. Stop competing. What are you competing for? Stop that. Okay, like you got all these vanity metrics. Like, don't even play that game. Oh, how big's your team? Who cares?
Mm.
How much GCI did you make? What'd your gross profit in your business? Who cares? Like nobody cares about that. How many units of that widget did you sell? Nobody cares. You know what people care about in business? What was your profit? But nobody ever asked that question.
Yeah.
So here we are competing to try to become something that isn't even real. Like stop competing with that. As a solopreneur, just know that you have the ability to become anything you want right now. For me, I can't. I'm a battleship. It's going to take a very long time for me to turn my ship around. However, if you're a solopreneur, you're a speedboat. You can turn immediately. You can pivot immediately. And that's your blessing. That's your opportunity. Now, with that being said, understand this. When you're a solopreneur, you get to write your ticket. And maybe that is your best play.
Mm.
Like building a big business is not the answer always.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you're in sales, being a salesperson is the best position. I have a guy on my team, my son-in-law. He's going to make like $400,000 this year. He's almost a millionaire. He's like 32 years old. You know, he's killing it, right? And I'm like always telling him like, one day I'm going to give this company you and I'm going to go take your job. You've got the best job in the house. You don't have to deal with nothing. You just have to sell things. Well, at 50 years old, if I could go back in a lot of areas of my life, I would have just gone back and stayed as a solopreneur because it's such a simple life and there's such high yields to that. So don't compete and think, well, I don't have a big team, therefore I'm not successful. Not true. Oh, I don't sell a lot of units doesn't mean I'm not successful. What are your goals? I didn't ask you like for me, eventually you might ask me about investing, but like my goal is not to make $10 million in a year. My goal is to make $1 million a year. Well, what's your goal next year? Make $1 million a year. What's your goal after that? $1 million. What's your the 1 million? All right, Dan, like that doesn't sound like a growth mindset. Yeah, it is. Let me show you how. My goal is to make $1 million this year. And then my goal is to make $1 million next year in less time. So if I did it in 50 hours, next year I'm doing 40 hours. Year after that, I'm doing 30 hours. Year after that, I'm doing 20 hours. Year after that, I'm doing 10 hours. So you can make $3 million a year, never see your family, never enjoy your money or your life, or you can make $1 million a year working 10 hours a week. Or eventually make $1 million a year working no hours. Like that's the goal for me over the next 5 years, to keep making the money and reduce my hours down. Well, that's where leverage comes in. That's the other game.
That's good. So when you say write your own check as a solopreneur, what do you mean by that?
Well, you get to decide that. Like, you know, when you, again, in real estate, you see a lot of these big teams and you think, I want to be that. Like, no, you've left the sales business of selling real estate. And now you've gone into the sales business of your team. Now they determine your income. Even as big as I am now, the amount of people I have working for me now, I've got a philosophy. They pay the bills. Their responsibility is to pay the bills. Like the people that work for me, their job is to help the companies make enough money to pay the bills. My job is to make the profit. I get to write my own check because I determine the profit. For me, it's a simple formula. If I leave it up to somebody else, then it's up to their success, what they do, how hungry they are. I don't like that life. I'd rather have it where it's up to how hungry I am. I'd rather bet on myself, and I do. Now, I do have bets on my people. They're important to me, and they matter to me, but like not everybody's God didn't give them the same ambition, didn't give them the same dreams, same goals as he gave me. So I'm okay with the life I have, and they're okay with if they're okay with the life they have, then I'm going to provide them with a platform to have the life they want.
How come the $1 million a year is so important to you?
Because when you look at it from a perspective of, just for me in terms of lifestyle, that number makes sense to me. I have a simple strategy to retire at roughly 55 years old. And when I say retire, work because I want to, not because I have to. And that involves me, because I started a little late, that involves me putting $22,500 a month into the S&P 500. So I need to generate a certain level of revenue for that.
Mhm.
Then I also really like the philanthropic things I'm involved in. And because I really like it, I see it that it's making a big difference. I need to get a certain income level to do that.
Mhm.
And last but not least, just like you, Chris, when I started in real estate, the book I opened was called The Millionaire Real Estate Agent. So I set my goal to that. And then I built my life around that. And like when you think about goals and time, it works like this. So if you can imagine like a axis that looks like this, right? This is time. And this is, let's say, money. Okay. So you're going to say, in this much time, I want to hit this much money. So you guys are seeing kind of how I'm drawing that section. Well, when you have a goal that looks like that, time and money, what ends up happening is that then goes and becomes this box, your life. Well, I built my life around $1 million and it served me well. So like, that's the number that really makes sense. Oh, well, Dan, what happens if you make $2 million a year? I accelerate my plan. I'm happy with it, but I'm not like killing myself if I don't. This is my opportunity. I'm happy with it. If I come up short and hit 900, okay. But at the end of the day, my goal is $1 million and it works for me.
So it's clear you've thought this isn't just a number that you picked out randomly. You've thought about someday in the future and figured out what has to happen this year in order to get to where you want to be in the future.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. And I didn't come up with that number right away because I didn't have the financial maturity that I do right now. Now, listen, that's reality. You've got a 20-year-old listening to this podcast right now, and they hear me say something like $22,500 in the S&P 500. They're like, that's more than I make maybe in 6 months, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it seems so far off. Well, I'm going to go back to that 20-year-old and say, no, that applies to people like me. I have to do that to hit my goal. How about you just put $100 a month? And that 20-year-old is going to do the exact same thing that the all-knowing Dan Grieb did, the wonderful and all-knowing Dan Grieb did, not listen to the old man. They're not. And then they're going to get their butts kicked, and then they're going to realize that there is an hourglass that has been turned over on their life, and that they're not going to be able to retire or do the things they wanted to do when they wanted to do them. And then they're going to get their butts in gear, and they're going to make it happen. That's what happened to me. I didn't listen. I learned all of my lessons the hard way. And, now I'd like to say that my goal is a lot like yours. Street Smart Millionaire is going to be all about giving away the 3 decades worth of coaching I've paid for, the 3 decades worth of counseling I've received, and giving it away so other people don't have to feel the same amount of pain and suffering that I did, hopefully, and then I can become somebody that they'd want to listen to.
Yeah.
And it's, again, who do I have to become that a teenager or young person, an entrepreneur listening to your show, an adult, a mom or a dad would be like, you know what? I'm going to write down what Dan Grieb said, and I'm going to apply that to my life.
Yeah, that's so good.
Well, that adds the accountability to you, Chris. That adds the accountability to me. Listen, if you and I decide we're going to go to a real estate event or some business conference and start getting drunk at the bar and doing something stupid, like everything we said becomes nonsense to those people.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to live my life by a certain code and by a certain level of morality, not only because of my faith, but because I owe it to all those people that are going to tune in and listen to what we just said.
Man, that's good. Yeah, people pay attention.
You owe it to them.
Yeah, that's so good. I shared with you before we hit record today that the last time I saw you in person was a year and 2 months ago, I think to be exact, in Chattanooga, doing the 144.6 race. And I shared with you, like, man, like looking back, it's clear I got burnt out. Now I've still done a handful of races, and yet not at the level of intensity as then. And so I'm curious, like when somebody has clarity on the vision, the life of who they desire to be for them and their family, and yet life happens where you get burnt out, you get frustrated, discouraged.
Yeah.
What's your best advice in order to pick up, to really get back on track and to get back to getting after it? Because that's something I've struggled with, in particular when it comes to physical health. I haven't let myself get back to where I was before. And yet, man, just the idea of a triathlon, frankly, or a long one, sounds exhausting.
Yeah. Okay. So let me break that down into bite-sized pieces here for you.
Yeah.
Okay. First, let me tell you the reason why I did so many.
Mm-hmm.
Number one is I was 100 pounds overweight, and I went after the triathlon journey just to lose the weight and to prove that I could do it to myself. Okay, that was the first reason. The second reason that I did it is, I'm a product of a dad that wasn't that great. I'm a product of a family that just wasn't that great, and I want to be the guy that changes my family tree. I want that so desperately. And so I came up with this idea in my head. I don't know if it's true or not. I believe it to be true for me. And Chris, like maybe you can validate it. Give me your thoughts on it. You and I kind of grew up kind of the same way. Is I asked the question, why do dads leave their family at alarming rates? Just alarming. They just leave. I mean, you don't find a lot of moms that leave their kids and just abandon them like my dad did after abusing us. All of that. Like, why do they? And I came up with this answer: adversity. Adversity occurs in their lives and they're not prepared for it.
Yep.
So what I said is first question I asked when I went on this journey for triathlons is, what does the average person do? And they said the average person trains for a year and then does an Ironman. And I said, I'm not the average person. I'm going to train for a year and then I'm going to do 10 Ironman events. And then I did the 10 and I did ocean marathons, which are like 7-mile swims. And then I did more marathons and all kinds of adventure races, rode my bicycle across the state of Florida in the middle of the night through trails, not even on the roads, just crazy stuff. Literally swam in the east coast of Florida, rode my bicycle, swam in the west coast of Florida, then rode back. Took a couple days to do that. Just all kinds of crazy endurance things. But the whole reason I kept doing it was to practice adversity. Because here's the deal. Adversity is going to happen. I'm a guy. I jokingly say this. I'm a guy. I've never been a woman, so I can't speak for women. Women, I think you do a great job. God bless you. I was raised by a woman. She was fantastic. She did the best she could as a mom. But for the men, I'm just disappointed in us sometimes. And I didn't want to be like my dad. So I said, I'm going to wake up in the morning and I'm going to voluntarily take myself to places of extreme adversity. So when adversity shows up to me involuntarily, I'm ready. Now just think about it. I mean, if you know anybody that's been married a long time, there's probably been an event, a time, a conversation that went something like this. I'm not sure I love you anymore. Like, as a man, like, how do you prepare yourself for that? That's adversity. You mean everything I've worked for, our family, it doesn't matter to you anymore? Like, what? Well, I'm prepared for that. When my kids are sick and they need the leadership to show up, I don't have the leadership DNA. I didn't have a role model around me growing up that was calm, collected, that put it together, that did the right things. So I had to practice it somewhere. I practiced it in the morning when I swam. I practiced it in the afternoon when I ran. I practiced it in all these other areas. And that was, for me, the reason why I continued on with such intensity. I'll give you one last story. The Disney Marathon's about to come up in a week. And this is the first time in 7 years I'm not doing it. I've actually retired from endurance athletics. But last year, I was doing the Disney Marathon, and I did not train very hard for it. I was already knowing I was going to retire, but I already signed up. So I figured, I'll just do this Disney Marathon, which, by the way, I didn't do just the Disney Marathon. I did something called the Dopey. On Thursday, you run a 5K. Friday, you run a 10K. Saturday, you run a half marathon. Then Sunday is the full marathon. So by Sunday, I was pretty tired. Then you got to drive there, get up at 2 o'clock in the morning. The race starts at 5 o'clock. It's hard. You run through the park. It's really cool, but it's tough on your body because you don't sleep very well and all the other stuff. And I'd done that 6 years in a row prior. And typically on the marathon, it gets kind of boring during this one section. It's just straight running on the road. There's not a lot going on. And I usually run, because I've been doing it so many times, I've done over 30 marathons, that I'll run with my cell phone. So I'll just FaceTime my wife or somebody while I'm running and talk to her. And so I FaceTime my wife in the middle of the race and she says, how you doing? And I said, I'm not doing good. I'm dying out here. This is probably the last one. I'm not doing it anymore. Of course, I've been saying this is the last one for years. And I said, this is probably the last one of these I'm going to do. And she goes, why don't you just quit? And I'm like, quit? And she goes, yeah, why don't you just quit? You've done enough. You've got nothing to prove. And I said, no, sweetheart. I'm not quitting. And she said, why not? And I said, Mindy, I'm not quitting on you. I'm not quitting on our kids. I'm not quitting on our employees. I'm not quitting on life. I'm not quitting on this race. I'm not going to start practice quitting now or ever. If I commit to it, I'm finishing. And she goes, Dan, but you've done so many marathons. You don't have to do this one. You have nothing to prove. I said, I didn't complete a marathon today yet. I have to prove that. So I'm going to prove to you that you married the right guy, and I'm going to finish this race. And I finished the race. And it was the commitment to do that. It was the commitment to be something better.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't have to be in a triathlon. It could be just making your bed every day. I'm going to make my bed for 300 days. Why? Because I want to set an example to my family that I'm the person that does that. Okay, great.
Yeah.
I'm going to be the person that in my family does X. And it's different than ever has been done before. And you just focus on it. You make it happen. That's commitment. And so that's the whole reason why I had all of this intensity. I still have the intensity. I just have the intensity in different areas now. And I'm learning to take that intensity and push it into other spaces.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. The one thing that I do like about triathlons, Dan, is that it was like the one thing to focus on that caused me to be intentional with my sleep, my nutrition, with my water intake, with it helped me focus on my health holistically as a result of signing up for these races. So what's that look? And I realize there's different seasons for all of us in life because it doesn't have to be triathlon to learn these lessons. And yet I think for both of us, we've learned a great deal when it comes to our athletic adventures. What is like your health journey? What's that? How are you being intentional now? What's that look like?
Yeah,
You
well,
doing kung fu or something? What are you up to, man?
yeah, well, I think it's important that your audience knows about this little triathlon I did so that they can have some context around what I'm about to talk about. About in the year 2020, I had the opportunity to lead a young man with Down syndrome to an Ironman. And by doing that, it set a world record. It made worldwide news. It brought on sponsorships. It brought on, fame. It brought on everything for Chris and myself. And then my identity became Ironman. Like I have people today, I've run an Ironman. Well, I guess last Ironman I ran was maybe like a year ago. Maybe a year ago. And people just call me Ironman, like, oh, Ironman Dan. They just say that to me. And I don't want to be that guy. That was the season, right?
Mm-hmm.
But my whole persona was that. Like everybody knew me. That is the thing that Dan Grieb is most famous for, is doing an Ironman with Chris Nickage and being this person. Like that's it, right? So it was really a little challenging for me to make a switch into something else, right? So for me, I went from Ironman training, endurance training, to focusing on something else, and that's longevity. Like I want to live to be 90 years old. I want to live to be 100 years old. So now my focus is shifting from, I got to sleep so I can train. I got to train so I can hit my metrics on my run. I got to train so I can hit my bike splits. I can train so I can hit my swim times. I can make my cutoffs so I can be a good guide. Those type things. Now I've got to sleep so I can be here to see my great grandkids. Now I've got to keep my weight off so that I don't get diabetes. I got to focus on these things because I want that. And again, guys, I apologize. I can go on and on things, but let me give you one more piece to this that's, in my brain. And Chris, I'll ask you the question. Okay.
Sure.
Do you know your great grandfather's first names?
I was fortunate on my grandpa's side to know my great grandpa, his father, which would be George. But on my dad's side, couldn't even take a guess.
Okay. Most people cannot tell you their great grandfather's first name. Now, my question to you, why do you think that is?
Man, number one, it's sad just thinking about it, because what that means is that it's possible 2 generations from now for me to be forgotten. When I think about me being forgotten, I think about a lack of impact.
Okay. So can I break it down into
the impact?
Yeah, that's possible, right? So I use this term a lot. The world according to Dan answer is this. Number 1, they didn't do anything of any real impact. If your great grandfather's last name was Marriott or Hilton, you'd probably know who their first name too, right? Keller, you would know who that was, right? You know a lot of people like that. So they didn't do anything of that much significance, which, by the way, like, not everybody can do things of that big of significance, have a hotel brand or real estate brand or whatever. But the second one you can control, and that is they weren't concerned with you knowing who they were. Now in the Bible, it says leave an inheritance for your children's children's children, right? Like great-grandchildren, right? But that doesn't have to be money only. If the only thing I give my children is money, I have completely failed them.
Right.
I have to give them something more than money. I have to give them a process of living life, a future to see, all of the other pieces of that. And I'm very concerned with my great-grandchildren learning those lessons. So I have little things I know, like this is going to sound stupid, but everything with me is legacy driven now. I have a series of pens, Mont Blanc pens. I've got one of them with me right now. Here's one. And it's an expensive pen. I mean, let's be real. And these pens, they're not pens to me. All of these will go to my grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Now, by the time my great-grandchildren are, alive and using what you would call a writing instrument, it'll probably be a laser. They'll be like, what the hell is this? Huh? But someone's going to tell them this is the thing that the man of integrity and character signed the contracts to become the man he was, to build the businesses he did, to write the deals he did, the ones you'll never see that determined who he was. That's this. Now, another thing here is I believe I'm the man that's going to change my family tree. I believe it. I'm living it. I'm going for it. So this is another kind of silly one, but I have a bourbon collection. And most people don't know who their great-grandfather is and they don't celebrate him. But for me, when I die, for 50 years after I'm dead, we're going to release bottles of bourbon. It was 2 because we had 100. It'll probably be closer to 4 or 5 now because we have several hundred. People know about my legacy bourbon. If you want to guarantee a phone call with me, send me a bottle of rare bourbon. It doesn't have to be expensive, but bourbon from your town. I'll put it on my shelf. I'll never drink it. And I'll give it to my family. And for 50 years after I'm dead, they're going to take a couple of bottles of these bourbon and they're going to go, here, Grieb family, this is from your great-grandfather. Remember him.
Wow.
So here's the question. Remember, we started a long time ago asking this question, who do you have to be? Chris, who do I have to be that when they open that bourbon, they're like, yeah, the guy who changed our family tree. Man, he was amazing. I've heard such stories about him. Or this guy, like my dad. Bottle of bourbon from that guy, not interested. I don't want to be nothing like him. Heard his stories, not interested.
Wow.
And I'm making the decision today that when they open that bourbon, they think about me. They're proud of me.
Yeah, you pre-decided.
Already decided.
Man, that's powerful.
Now, how am I going to live today? That's the question. Because you can blow it all in an instant. Sounds good for 20 years. Sounds good for 30 years. Sounds good for 40 years. One bad decision and that's it. And I'm not making those decisions. I'm making the right decisions. Compounded over time. That's
good. Compounded. You are the first person and only person in my life that taught me about compound interest. Remember that? You pulled out your phone and you asked me to pull out mine.
Yeah.
And you walked me through the compound interest calculator. So there's no way I'm going to end today's session with you and I without asking you to share with us a little bit about investing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that if we don't compete and we don't say, I want to be like them for the purpose of being like them, you say, I want to be here because that's where I'll live my best life. I think that that's important. I think you gotta have that plan. So for me, I became my family's first millionaire, but like my podcast is called Street Smart Millionaire, but it's not about just the money. You can be a millionaire at a lot of things. Someone who's been married for 25 years is a millionaire in marriage. I'm more proud of the fact that I'm a millionaire in marriage than I am a millionaire in money. So we're going to get back to the financing thing, but I want to make sure we put a bow on this, okay?
Yeah.
I believe I'm a millionaire parent. I have 2 biological children, 1 other daughter that we adopted from Venezuela. I'm madly in love with every one of them. I adopted her late in her life, late in our lives with my wife. And it's so beautiful. I'm a millionaire there. I'm more proud of being a millionaire parent than I am being a millionaire money financially. My health. It's harder to get abs, which I don't have and have never had. It's harder to get abs than it is to get $1 million. Do you know that's like Google that?
That's wild.
It is true. It's true. So if you can get abs, you can get $1 million. If you, but if you get $1 million, you probably still can't get abs. Like that's reality. Like that's for real, for real. So you could be a millionaire in your health too. But if you want to be a millionaire financially, excuse me, if you want to be a millionaire financially, I think start over. If you want to be a millionaire financially, you got to set a game plan for it. And you got to believe it's possible. Now things are baby steps down that way. I'm going to give you some books to read at the end here to kind of prime the pump for it. So for me, I just set a plan, right? And what I like is I like simplicity. The S&P 500 is very simple. Do not invest in the S&P 500. Do not invest in anything based on what I said. Invest on the things that you know. So if you're like, I like what Dan's talking about, I'm going to do what Dan said, then here's the deal. Go research it. Here's what you're going to find. Number one, nothing has outperformed the S&P 500 historically over the course of 30 years. So for me, that makes sense. The next thing I love about the S&P 500 is it's 500 of the companies in the United States of America. So you're basically betting on America. If America's doing well, I'm doing well. If America's going to be better in 30 years than it is right now, then I'm going to be better in 30 years than I am right now. I like that. I like that a lot. Now, that requires, compounding in time, but that's okay. I like that. The next thing here is I'm in real estate, so I have an advantage, so I can invest in real estate. So I buy one house a year, and I invest $20,000, $22,500 a month into the S&P 500. Simple plan, compounded over time. Now, I'm 50 years old, so I got to do that. I got to do it for the next 5 years. And if you were to take those numbers, invest them over 5 years, and knew what I had in the bank currently, you would see that that's a very simple formula to $10 million at 65. I only have to do it for 5 years. And at the end of 5 years, I can coast the next 10 years. And at 65, it's $10 million. Well, you have to ask yourself, well, how much money do I think I want to have in the bank at 65, 55? You name the number. And then you just work backwards to say, what are the numbers that I need to hit monthly to compound to that? That's easy. When you start thinking about 200 a month, that's a lot easier than 2,400 a year. So you can do that. So that's a simple plan for that. Let me give you a couple quick book recommendations. Number one, I think you should have a foundation, whether you're in debt, not in debt, and read the book called Financial Peace by Dave Ramsey or Total Money Makeover. Those are two great books. And they just basically teach you some baby steps around finances and understanding that. I think it's important to understand the difference between good debt and bad debt. There is some good debt and bad debt. Dave Ramsey thinks that all debt is bad. And if you go down that path and you only follow his plan, you can be very successful. If you're disciplined in your finances, you can be very successful. I was not very disciplined in my finances when I was younger, so I needed Dave Ramsey's plan for a long time. Then I got disciplined, and then I moved on to your next book, which is simply called Rich Dad, Poor Dad. The way these people think versus the way those people think. I like that. There's a thing in the book called the cash flow quadrant. I think that's important to understand that. And then the last kind of couple books I would read, if you're in business, Profits First, which talks about taking your profits first. And then last book that I would suggest is I'm trying to say The Simple Path to Wealth, but that's not the book. The Psychology of Money. So the last book that I'd recommend is called The Psychology of Money. Now, the one thing you're going to know about me as a leader and most people that are very successful is they can I got no notes. I got no books sitting around me right now. These are the books that I would talk to you about money. Now, if you said, what about being a great parent? Here's the books. What about being a great husband? Here's the books. What about health? Here's the books. I'm not doing this all by myself. I'm surrounded by my mentors. My mentors are, some of them are alive and some of them are dead. And I sleep with them. They go with me in my car. They go with me on vacation. My mentors go everywhere I go. And some days I stand in front of this bookshelf and I say, mentors, I'm scared. I don't know what to do in this area of my life. Speak to me. And I pull them down and they show me the way.
That's so good. So much wisdom there. Man, thank you so much, Dan.
Honored, my friend. God bless you. I'm really glad we got a chance to do this.
Absolutely.
If anything that I said resonates with anyone, they're more than welcome to hit me up on Instagram. It's Dan Grieb. Danny, is it Dan Grieb?
D Grieb.
Oh, D Grieb. So DGRIEB. You can hit me up there. What I tell people is I prefer that as the method of communication. And here's why: I get to see a photo of you. I get to kind of find out what you're all about. And then I can respond to you like I'm responding to a human. You're welcome to email me to dan@home2sell.com. I am located in Orlando, Florida. I have a real estate team and some other small businesses. And if you're in Orlando and you're a real estate agent, you want to shadow me, just come check me out. I love having people in the office. I got a guy shadowing me right now, sitting just outside the frame, listening to what I'm doing.
Nice. You're so generous, Dan, man. I love you so much. Thank you. And I'll put the how people can find you in the comments so people can click on the link and make it super easy for them.
Well, it's my hope that what we talked about today brings healing and hope to people.
That's so
and as
good.
we sign off, this is what I'd like to say. I'm very Irish and I'm very proud of my heritage. And we have this Irish saying we say, and it says simply this: may the roads rise up to meet you. May the rains fall softly on your fields. May the sun shine upon your face. And until we meet again, may God hold you in his hand.
That's so good. Thank you, Dan.
God bless you, my friend. Thank you.